to invite the relevant staff, Diane Brandish, to the table. And I'd like to just begin by saying thank you to Diane and her team for the, I believe, quite extraordinary effort that has gone into briefing councillors on the annual plan and helping take us through all of the issues. We had our workshops, which I thought were very successful last week, but there has been a considerable amount of effort go into this. We're a very new council, most of us, and I just wanted to put it on the public record how grateful we are to you and your team. So I hope that that's... Thank you very much. So in order to get a resolution onto the table for us to debate, the recommendation is set out on clause 2 of the agenda, and that is now in front of you. That we resolve to approve the rate requirement, approve the draft annual plan, approve for distribution and consultation, and adopt the timetable for consultation. And that is moved by Raf Manji, seconded by Jamie Goff. So the first thing that I'd like to do is to invite councillors that have questions that they would like to address to staff to advise me now if there are any questions that you'd like to address, and if not, we'll move on to debating the draft annual plan. Are there any? Jani Johansson.
Yeah, thank you. I do appreciate you've sent some information through in regards to rates remission, and apologies if I haven't seen the response, but I was interested in understanding in terms of CCDU and Sarah, how much are we proposing to offer in terms of a rates remission?
We don't know the exact amount because the Central City, we think as a result of the revaluations, the Central City valuations will come down lower than they are now. So we don't know the precise amount. We estimate it to be somewhere less than $500,000.
Just so I'm clear, so for all the land that the CCDU have acquired in the Central City? No,
it's not all the land. It's only the land that will become roads and part of the public realm. So right. It's not all of the land.
So do we have an idea, and we don't have any idea about what the quantum will be?
Not at the moment we don't, but we will have a clearer view once the revaluations are processed and we can go away and do some more work on it. As I said, I can only come up with a best estimate for now.
Will the government's, following on from that, will the government's announcements around the Eastern Frame in terms of their intention now to develop quite substantially the residential component of that actually reduce the amount of public realm that will be transferred ultimately and subject to the rates remission policy?
If it was a park or something prior to, then yes, it would. I mean, I guess I can't give a definitive answer because I'm not quite sure how it's changed. But in principle, yes, you would expect so.
Yeah. So sorry, Jani.
So just in simple terms, property that Sarah have acquired will be, the default setting is that they pay rates on the value of that.
Yes, they do.
Where they identify space for the public realm, they will come to us and say, we want a remission on this space. What is the...
Once it becomes part of the public realm.
Right. So does that only happen when it transfers to us? This is what I'm trying to get a handle on. Does that happen while it's still in Sarah's ownership? No. Or does it only happen when it transfers to the council?
Yes. Once it transfers to the council, right. But prior to that, Sarah are paying all their rates.
Right. Thank you.
And just the second question I had through the chair was CDC and CCT. I know they get quite considerable project funding, and I just got a bit confused. We've had a memo back around this. I don't quite understand why the project funding would have an impact on their capability. because I always thought that they had a lot of special projects that they did, that they came and got extra funding post-earthquake, that possibly now we no longer would wish to do. So can you just help me understand why they're still requesting the same level of project funding that they've previously had?
Mr Bywater has the answers.
As part of the 3-year plan previously, the distinction between special project funding and what you might describe as their core funding kind of disappeared. So effectively there was a set of levels of service that the council agreed for CCT and CDC to deliver, and then there were 2 funding sources, being rates and the CEF fund, to make that happen. The connection between certain bits of funding and certain levels of service were effectively severed at that point. So with the levels of service that those organisations have to deliver, there isn't really now technically a distinction between the special projects and the core funding.
So sorry, through the chair. So CCT doing big Australian campaigns, for example, is something that they're just going to do that, whether they, it's up to them to do. They determine how they spend that money. I mean, I think previously they would have come to us and said, hey, we want to do a big Australian campaign. Yep. Can you fund us 500,000 or however much?
Sure.
Are you saying now that we no longer have that sort of relationship?
You set what you want them to deliver in terms of levels of service, which you've done, which includes those campaigns. But there isn't now a separate distinction between, I suppose, a particular level of service, say around Australian campaigns, and a specific part of the funding that you give them. There's a set of levels of service and there's a set of money, but they don't link kind of individually.
So we might wish to change the levels of service, which would mean we no longer need to give them the huge amounts of funding.
Yep. Again, I've made the point that you've already saved 10% out of CDC, and certainly at this point it was 5% out of CCT from what they were anticipating next year, and again 5% out of CCT because you did not want to close the Akara Service Visitor Centre, which was the other option that they offered up.
And final question is, in regards to the community funding, what percentage of community funding is being proposed to be reduced by?
I'll answer that one.
It was originally 7.5%, but it'll be less than that now because of the funding that was added back at the meeting of last week. And the recommendation was a one-off, so it wasn't a permanent reduction, it was a one-off proposed reduction in order to assist the council through this year.
So it'd be about 5%?
I would think somewhere between 5 and 7.5. I'm sorry, I don't have the precise percentage.
And we're putting extra funding for special projects aside from the Capital Endowment Fund as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Phil Clearwater.
One question is sort of a procedural one, and it's because I want to ask a question that's in relation to a supplementary report, but it's whether in asking questions we need to have the supplementary reports, and there's a development contribution policy one too, whether we need to formalise that, but I would just like to ask
My
a question.
advice is that we can debate that during the course of this, we'll discuss it during the course of this and debate it. It will be moved at the end of the deliberation process before we put clause 2. So I rule that we can debate it or ask questions about it and debate it in this period. Yep.
And so, Diane, in relation to the supplementary agenda that you sent us, and part 5 of that, with the amendments, it's in 2.1.4, it's reinstatement in relation to the community grants, and that they include community board grants too. But if, for example, instead of reinstating 150,000, if the council were to wish to reinstate all of reinstate that grant to its previous amount, I just want to get a figure on what that would be, because my understanding from previous discussions was it would be 664,000, but I just want to see if you can confirm that.
If you were looking to reinstate, it would be a further 390,000 above what it is now.
With a further 390,000?
Yes.
Good, thank you.
Andrew Turner.
Okay.
I've previously asked questions about the head-to-head walkway and the 300,000, which originally was in 3-year plan, which is proposed to be deferred through this annual plan process. And we have a working group which are working with staff successfully. This is a project which has been on the books for, or which has been discussed in an aspirational project for a number of years and has been funded for the first time to any great extent through the current 3-year plan as a result of an amendment moved by the Mayor at the 3-year plan process, as I understand it in previous discussion. I've spoken with the staff who are directly involved in the project, and obviously the working group have an aspiration of getting this underway as quickly as possible. The working group and the staff are actually for the first time working well together, and I understand from staff that there's a work programme which is around equal to the 300,000 that was originally in the budget, which is capable of being delivered in the 2014-15 year. At the same time, we have had correspondence with Terry Howes, who has suggested that that programme should be deferred. And I'm interested in the reasoning why we would be wanting to defer a programme where a working group of the community board and the staff working on the project are capable of delivering something that's been a community aspiration for around 8 or 9 years.
I think Terry Howes was...
Terry's right here, yep.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. My suggestion of sort of deferring things just for 12 months was in order for the staff and that working group to really complete their piece of work in terms of what they want to achieve and the timeframes that they want to achieve, because I think there's a lot of pressure in terms of accelerating that whole head-to-head walkway project and delivering it sooner than we previously forecast in previous plans, and therefore I wanted a few months for that group of people to work closely together so that we could then come back at the long-term plan with a really good programme and a plan and the associated funding to support it. That was my rationale for that.
Yeah, with respect to what you're saying, my belief, certainly having sat on a couple of meetings of the working group and had some very involved conversations with staff, is that we're quite some way down that track already. We're actually in a position where approximately the first third of the walkway could be delivered within the next 12 months, and some serious scoping work done on the other part of the walkway as well, on the Diamond Harbour side. And I'm certainly keen that we don't put the brakes on that work when it's actually got some real momentum for the first time. So I'd certainly be very keen, and obviously we'll come to this when we look at the supplementary paper, but I'm certainly very keen for the first part of that work to proceed as scoped, and for further scoping work to be happening within the next 12 months so that we can actually accelerate it perhaps a year faster than you're proposing. Thank you.
There are other questions? Phil Clearwater.
Just to follow up one to Andrew's question, Terry, it's really just to clarify from your comments too, is it feasible for that project to actually be got underway this financial year?
I would need to check with the staff because they may have some aspirations and thoughts about how things can be delivered, but I'm not close enough to that project in detail to understand how practical it is to deliver, and that's what I'd like to understand.
Thank you, Jerry.
There are other questions? I want to ask a question myself around the residential red zone, the earthquake affected properties for rates remission. So, and I think that the policy doesn't. I mean, I'm looking at page 117, which sets out the remission policy for ratepayers most affected by the earthquakes. it doesn't sort of seem to set out how those in the residential red zone who on the flat land who are not affected by Section 124 notices, that their rates remission is lower, or not even the residential red zone, but people who can't live in their properties because of the earthquake, so they still own their properties, but they're living somewhere else. There will be still a lot of people in that situation now. But if they're not affected by rockfall, then it's not 100% remission. So can you just help me locate that in the policy? But what I'm trying to get to is why are people who are not able to live in their property getting a lower rate of remission from the council than people who are subject to a Section 124 notice? What's the difference between somebody who's subject to a Section 124 notice who can't live in their property and somebody who can't live in their property because it was substantially damaged in the earthquake?
There was, as you're aware, there was, excuse me, there wasn't a lot of difference in the sense of if you can't live in your property. The original view was, as I'm sure you're aware, was that the 124 was imposed on people as opposed to the other, where you could get your house repaired and moved in. But in fact, it's the 124s that get the entire 100% remission. People on the flat land are getting, I believe, paying 40%. So where is that in the policy? I mean, this is the full policy on remission, isn't it? Yes, it is.
So where is that stated that people who can't live in their houses are remitted to 40%? I mean, the reason that I mention it is that I know that some people will want to make a submission on this, and it will be raised during the context of the public hearings, and I can't see where to direct people to the particular.
Okay, it's on page 117 at the bottom,
yeah.
And the reason it's not as clear as what you were saying is because we've amended it to say the rates would be charged on the land value only, which is what the 40% used to approximate to, but we amended it slightly, and remember I did raise with that we were making that. So what we're saying is if you can't live in your house, we will remit the rates on the improvements so that you're paying rates on the land value only.
Right. So yeah, I mean, in a way, I kind of wanted to tease that out in the public arena, yes, so that people are very clear that's where they have to direct their concern if they believe that there ought to be equal treatment between those that can't live in their homes due to the earthquake. Glenn Livingston.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Diane. It would be good to tease this out. We've tried this in the last few annual plans, but I think to tease out why the policy obviously applies to those under Section 124, when it comes to the flat land residents, it's kind of by virtue of the red zone designation that I would argue that. Now we all know, I don't want to get into debate, land can be built on, but it would be good to know to kind of differentiate between the two, because by extension of that designation, you're not supposed to, that those homes are rendered uninhabitable. So it would be good to actually tease that out.
I think that, I may have confused things by reference to the red zone. I wasn't just referring to red zone properties. Any properties on the flat land, whether they were red zoned or not, they were subject to the 40% remission. Regardless, it was a subsequent decision to bring in the Section 124 notices at 100%. The trouble was that the justification for only 40% remission at the time was that rates paid for a number of services and that those services continued to be provided, libraries, parks, all of those other services. The trouble is that when you try and apply that to why another group got 100% remission, it doesn't hold. So So the debate is going to be, and I know that community groups want to submit on this issue, and I guess my purpose in raising it in this way was to highlight where it was in the remission policy so that people could focus on it as an issue.
And the levels of service have been compromised too, so that was, yet other residents they're having to pay 100% as per other residents whose levels of service haven't been compromised.
Yeah. Ali Jones.
I wondered if, Diane, you or your team have looked at what it would actually mean if that 100% remission was applied across the board to those of us who are in exactly this situation, that we're not able to live in our houses because they're damaged, but we're renting. Do you know what that would mean in terms of rates?
I know we have done the work. I'm sorry I can't tell you right today, but I could send you an email to let you know what.
If you wouldn't mind, thank you.
Phil, and then Yanni, Jamie.
Diane, I perhaps should have raised this with you earlier, but we've had the matter discussed in informal discussions. It's around the area of what we'd call Seeding Events Fund, and I think that was going to be new money, and so I'm sorry I couldn't find it in the agenda, but just to ask you about some clarification about what that might mean for council's information too. Because where I'm coming from, I'm just wondering if that Seeding Events Fund of new money of 75,000, if in effect that could include some besides events, in effect projects, and if it might be possible that funding be kind of like attached to the Metropolitan Strength and Communities Fund in some way. So I'm just wondering, really, can you recall just what kind of things would be under that heading, Seeding Events Fund, and if it could include community projects?
No, I did ask and I didn't get you're talking about the 2.5 million that's being set aside? No, this is... the 75, okay.
75,000.
Right, okay. No, I'm sorry, I would have to go back to Councillor Buck to get the answer to that. I know it was the amount she wanted set aside, but I don't have the precise detail, I'm sorry.
Okay, we could look at that later.
Yep, and we could expand on that in the document that goes out so that it's clearer to people.
Okay, thanks, Diane.
Yanni?
Yeah, thank you. It was just in relation to the rates remission policy. Under the policy 9, other remissions deemed fair and equitable. It's a really complicated process, and it almost never happens. It's basically where staff would bring a full report to council and we'd make a decision. I did ask through the workshop whether we could identify a more streamlined process, perhaps a high-level delegation to staff to work through, in cases where there is severe financial hardship. I'm concerned that we've still got a policy that means that very few people will ever be able to access it because it is so bureaucratic at the moment.
This is to do with the
It's to do with rates remission.
Yeah.
So, there's some really good examples that have happened over the last 3 years for whatever situation. People are in a really, really difficult place financially, and we don't seem to have any ability to use discretion to help alleviate.
Yeah.
The reason, to be honest, the reason we do that is because it's up to the council to set remissions, and because you'd appreciate that staff get a lot of requests from people wanting remissions, and it's not the role of staff on the phones to decide who gets it and who doesn't, which is why we're really trying to enforce the rule of saying, if this is serious enough, we will bring it to council, rather than having staff perhaps deciding that it is easier to grant the remission than to enforce payment. So it's not meant as a cop-out. It's really trying to keep the decision where it rightfully belongs.
I think that's right. I think that there's an element of discretion that you don't want, at a staff level. You actually do want the policy set. I think I know one of the examples that Councillor Johansson's referring to is where if the power to issue a Section 124 notice was still around, we know that the council engineer would have issued one.
Yes.
And so maybe a small variation to the phrasing of that could in fact be addressed, and it may be something that we could do here and now, which is to simply say, or where a Section 24 notice would have been issued if it could have been, because what's happened is that the ability to Section 124 based on risk that comes from external to the property was only granted to the council by way of order in council under the emergency legislation. So if there was the capacity for us, then it wouldn't be a matter of staff, it would be a matter of technical engineering judgment as to whether the technical intent of the policy was met, and it wouldn't actually be creating a discretion. And maybe the answer to your broader question, Councillor, is some sort of allocation within the mayoral welfare fund, which I hope will be renamed in the course of this year.
I understand what you're saying. I do worry that we try and identify specific examples like S124s. Sarah also have Section 45s, which they can place over streets and public space and actually block access. So there's a number of different things that may happen. Business owners, for example, in the central city that didn't have access for a long period of time. So, there are other people that have power over people's ability to do anything or access their property that mean that there are these kind of, extraordinary circumstances that arise. This is going out for draft. We can, obviously people, if they're concerned, can submit, and we can possibly work with staff to look at a response that's more flexible. I do think there's a need for greater flexibility, but I do take on board the concern that staff have raised.
Yeah, thank you. Jamie?
Thanks. And I am glad that you raised the rates remission part on page 117 in there, because I think, to be fair, and just to quickly speak to that and to you in partial response to what you're saying, is that by my own admission, we haven't had a perfect solution to this. I admit that. We're asking a question with this draft now, and if we can find that and we can find something that's fair and it's just, that's why we consult on these things. So I hope we find that. For a little bit of clarity, I'm not saying that it's the magic bullet to answer anyone's queries around why this was reached, is that I guess some rationale around the 124 and 100% rates remission associated with those properties, and then properties that the houses were uninhabitable, was that the benefit that any landowner gets when you own a piece of property that you pay rates on is that you have options associated with it. You can repair a house there, you can store things there, you could put a container on there if you wanted to and rent it out for an income for storage, and that's your choice. The 124 is imposed. You can't step onto it, you can't put anything there, you cannot be there. And I guess the distinction that was reached, not necessarily saying it was 100% correct or fair and just or right or anything, but there are options associated with that land that you can actually still do things with. Now, I hope that we get people that do present to us as we go through this, and we can come up with something a bit better. But that is some rationale around it, which I hope can provide some context for someone, and even if it's for us to bear in mind, but for people that are submitting.
Yep, very good. Other questions? Glenn Livingston?
Thank you. I could be way off beam with this, but I guess I'm just fully aware of last year where we had to ensure that our rating formula was correct. Did that apply to our policy as well? I think it.
No.
Our rates remission policy, didn't we have to
No.
Okay.
No,
You're talking about the resolution,
Yes.
the resolution that was
Yes.
passed. So the resolution was not in accordance with the requirements of the
well, I guess
legislation.
my question is over who or what oversees the actual rates remission policy itself to ensure that it retains its integralness. And this is in the objective of the policy, it's about equity in the rating system. So I'd like to look at how does, for instance, the section 124, 100% remission stack up over and against, not granting that to flatlanders. Is there a question over the integralness of the policy itself?
Well,
Can
that's
that
why
come
it remains
forward?
with council, as you see, and that's why I'm reluctant to give it to staff, because the rates remission policy is determined by the councillors, and the decision to give 100% for 124s versus 40% or the land value for flatland was made by council, and it's the staff's view to implement what's done. And I have found the bit I was looking for before, but to answer your question, it sits with yourselves. It does not sit with the staff.
Yeah.
And the answer that I was looking for, Leanne, when you were asking before, is on page 113 at the bottom, where we're saying that the recommendation is that we could amend the delegations policy to give remissions in the instance that you were talking about, where if 124 opportunity existed, the engineer would grant it. And we're suggesting right at the very bottom of the page and the top of the following page that by amending the delegations policy, which again is a council decision, we could give the authority to senior staff to grant a remission where, in instances where, other than for some sort of accident of law, a remission would be available.
And that would enable the section 45 of the SERA legislation as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's very helpful, I think. Yeah. Yanni.
Just to be clear, I've read the SERA and CCDU remission policy. I am concerned that we don't specify it as when the land is legally transferred to us for the public realm. It is quite unclear around, it just says agreed, and there may be different interpretations in terms of, does the blueprint mean that it's been agreed? Does the cost share agreement mean it's been agreed? In my view, it should be where it's legally transferred to council, and that doesn't come through, so I would like just to signal and seek staff advice, but I would like a more defined legal benchmark for when it will start to be remitted.
So it's actually clarifying on page 118, remission 8, Central City Development Unit land intended for public realm, to make it clear that the remission applies to qualifying land owned by CCDU once it has transferred, legally transferred to the public realm.
So you just want me to just make that wording slightly stronger? Is that what you... Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So to actually clarify the intention, because I mean, the way what Councillor Johansson's raising is the way that it is written. It makes it sound like the remission applies while it is still owned by CCDU, but that is not the intention, is it?
No. I believe that's where it came from in the first instance, but we will certainly go back to do that. Thank you.
Yeah. Can we leave it to check? It's something that, because I'd rather not write it in if it's not accurate. It does need to be checked against the cost sharing agreement, as far as I'm aware.
Yes, and that's what Judith was just reminding me of. So we will go back.
I did hear the words cost sharing agreement down across the room. So.
We'll yes, we'll make sure that it complies.
Yeah, but we can deal with that when it comes back to us. Yeah, good.
I think it would be good to get more quantification about what our assumptions are about how much rates we are expecting to lose in the central city because of this. Although, having seen the new development proposal in the Eastern Frame, for example, much of that green space is now being put into residential. So it may be that actually we have less impact on our balance sheet because we actually get more rates, although we lose more of the green space that was in the blueprint.
Yes, I was somewhat surprised to see in the press the amount of money that is going to be expended on that green strip through the middle of the Eastern Frame. I think it was $31 million to develop. Sounds like a couple of swimming pools to me. Are there other issues that people want to raise? All right. Thank you, Diane. I'll open it up for debate.